Imagine a city the size of New York, empty. Now multiply that by 35. That is the number of people China says exist, but who, according to the data, simply are not there. That number was a lie, not a rounding error, not a statistical discrepancy, a lie. China's real population is estimated at somewhere between 1.0 and 1.1 billion, 300 million people. The entire population of the United States vanished from the official record, and the world's investment decisions and geopolitical strategies were all built on top of it. Every multinational that built a factory in China, every bank that lent against Chinese growth projections, every government that shaped foreign policy around a China of 1.4 billion. The evidence is not theoretical, it is physical. In the last 5 years, over 15,000 primary schools have closed across China, not because of policy, because there are no children to fill them. China's fertility rate is now 1.0, below Japan, below South Korea, the lowest of any major economy on earth. In a country of supposedly 1.4 billion people, you need 2.1 to keep a population stable. China is at 1.0. That is not a demographic challenge, and unlike South Korea or Japan, small, wealthy, technologically advanced, China is going to get old before it gets rich. To understand how this happened, you have to go back not to the one-child policy, you have to go back further. 5,000 years of Confucian civilization built around one thing, the family. In Confucian China, the family was the moral architecture of the civilization. Having children was not optional. It was the central obligation of a human life. In 1966, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution. Its stated purpose was to purge capitalism and tradition. Its actual effect was to destroy every institution that had held Chinese civilization together for 5,000 years. For 10 years, 1966 to 1976, teachers were imprisoned or killed, temples were destroyed, family lineage records were burned, at least 1.5 million people were killed, 100 million were persecuted. An entire educated generation was sent to farms for re-education. What the Cultural Revolution actually destroyed was not capitalism. It was the moral architecture. The state replaced the father. Mao replaced the father with the party. And when the party later told people not to have children, there was no moral structure left to say no. 4 years after Mao died, the party introduced the one-child policy. 1980. A country that had just spent a decade destroying its family culture was told it could only have one child. The policy ran for 35 years. An entire generation grew up as only children. No siblings, no cousins in many cases, because sons were culturally preferred. The one-child policy produced one of the most distorted sex ratios in history. At its peak, 117 boys born for every 100 girls. The party ended the one-child policy in 2015, then introduced a two-child policy, then a three-child policy in 2021, then cash incentives, housing subsidies, tax breaks, paid leave. The fertility rate kept falling from 1.7 in 2017 to 1.7 in 2017 to 1.7. In Nefri lever pulled, nothing moved. Here is why the incentives do not work. In 2023, China's official youth unemployment hit 21.3%. Then the government stopped publishing the data. A young Chinese woman in Shanghai, on a precarious salary, in a city where housing costs absorb most of it, has done the same calculation as her counterpart in Seoul or Tokyo. A child costs everything she has. The state is offering her 10,000 yuan. That is 2 months' salary. It was never going to be enough. For 20 years, China's economy ran on one engine, property. At its peak, real estate and construction accounted for 30% of Chinese GDP, more than any major economy in modern history. There are an estimated 65 million empty homes in China, enough to house the entire population of France twice over, built, sold, empty. These were not built by accident. They were built by design. The Chinese growth model required construction. Construction required selling apartments. Selling required buyers who believed prices would always rise. In 2021, Evergrande, China's largest property developer, collapsed under $300 billion of debt, the largest corporate default in history. The first crack in a system that had been cracking for years. Since 2021, Chinese property prices have fallen 20% nationally, in some cities more than 40%. For a country where families hold 70% of their wealth in property, that is not a correction. That is the destruction of a generation's savings. 70% of Chinese household wealth is held in property. When property falls, families do not feel poorer in the abstract. They are poorer in their kitchen, at their dinner table. When families feel poorer, they spend less. When China spends less, the economy slows. When the economy slows, property falls further. The loop is closed. China's total debt, government, corporate, and household, is estimated at approximately 300% of GDP, 3 times the size of the entire economy, and it is still growing. China borrowed to build, it built to grow, it grew to justify borrowing more. For 20 years this worked because the population was expanding and demanding the apartments being built. That population is no longer expanding, it is contracting. The demand that justified the debt is disappearing. The debt remains. China's official GDP growth for 2024 was 5%. Independent economists put the real figure at 3% or lower. The gap between what the party announces and reality has become a defining feature. The most telling sign is deflation. China is experiencing deflation, falling prices, in a major economy for the first time since Japan's lost decade. Deflation sounds harmless. It is not. When prices fall, consumers wait. When consumers wait, companies cut production. When production cuts, workers lose jobs. When workers lose jobs, they spend less. Japan called this the lost decade. It lasted 30 years. China's response to weak demand has been to export its way out, flooding global markets with cheap goods, solar panels, electric vehicles, steel. If you think that is a win for your wallet, look closer. You are not buying a product, you are importing a collapse. This strategy is producing the predictable result. Every country receiving those exports is now implementing tariffs. The United States, the European Union, India, Canada, Australia. In 2005, US tariffs on Chinese goods reached 145%. Not a negotiating position, a decoupling. The assumption that China and the West would stay integrated, 30 years of globalization, is over. Every problem reinforces every other. The population decline reduces the workforce. The shrinking workforce reduces growth. Reduced growth makes the debt harder to service. Harder debt service means less government spending on the social programs that might encourage families to have children, and the population declines further. China is not facing one crisis. It is facing 4 simultaneously: demographic, financial, geopolitical, and political, each making the others harder to solve. No country has faced this combination at this scale, and the government cannot admit any of it publicly without undermining the one claim its legitimacy rests on, that the party gets it right. By 2035, China's working-age population falls below 800 million. Every year from that point is smaller than the last. By 2035, 280 million Chinese citizens will be over 60, almost the entire current population of the United States, retired, being cared for by a workforce that is shrinking. China's pension system was designed for 5 workers per retiree. The ratio today is approaching 2, by 2040 closer to 1. China raised its retirement age in 2024 for the first time since 1978, not because it wanted to, because the pension arithmetic demanded it. And there is one dimension almost nobody will say directly: Taiwan. Xi Jinping is racing against his own census data. In 10 years, he will not have enough young men to man the tanks. If the great rejuvenation does not happen now, it never will. This is the demographic sunset. A government that cannot deliver prosperity looks for legitimacy abroad. Can China fix this? Partially, slowly, not before the worst of it arrives. Immigration is not realistic for a country built on Han cultural identity. Technology can improve productivity. It cannot replace a missing generation. Robots do not pay into a pension system. Automated factories do not create the consumer class that drives demand. When I looked at Japan, I saw a dying beauty. China is different. Japan got rich before it got old. China is facing the sunset while still in the dark. The deepest problem is political. To fix the fertility rate China would need to make cities dramatically more affordable, reduce working hours, build genuine social safety nets, and allow the kind of open civil society that makes young people feel secure enough to start families. Every single one requires the party to relinquish control it has spent 70 years accumulating. So the party will not fix it. It will manage it with propaganda about the glory of large families, with increasingly desperate financial incentives, with data suppression when the numbers get embarrassing, and with the quiet understanding that the century China was promised belongs to a China that no longer quite exists. Back in that empty classroom, 40 desks, 3 children, a teacher at the front, still teaching. Because that is what teachers do, even when the arithmetic has already written the ending. The children in that classroom will grow up in a China very different from the one the party promised. Smaller, older, more burdened, carrying a debt, a pension obligation, and a geopolitical ambition sized for 1.4 billion, and there will be fewer of them to carry it. Every year, China didn't run out of people, it ran out of reasons to have them, then lied about how many it had left. That is not a demographic crisis. That is a civilization that dismantled its own foundations, built a century of ambition on the rubble, and is now discovering that the rubble does not hold. Subscribe to World Fracture. If the 1.4 billion is a lie, what else is? Tell me in the comments, can a civilization survive when it loses its moral architecture? I want to know what you think.